Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Frazier with Okta. I'm work on the security team, and I'm joined by my good friend and smart person, Vinu Paniker, who works on the federal systems engineering team. We're going to talk a little bit about who Okta is. Hopefully, most of the people on the call know who we are, but I'll dig a little bit deeper into kind of our core functionality and core philosophies, specifically how it relates to zero trust. And then I'm going to rely on Vinu being the smart guy to do the demo and kind of walk through some architecture examples and some use case examples that are aligned with some of the zero trust architecture stuff that we all talk about. And then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A if anyone has any questions. And as Kirsten pointed out, I'm pretty easy to find, so you can either find me through Kirsten and Tom or anywhere on the interweb where you get your contacts. So for those who don't know Okta is Identity and Access Management Organization. We were kind of born on the cloud about 10 years ago. Our co-founders, Todd McKinnon and Freddie, founded the company. They came out of Salesforce. When they were at Salesforce, they realized that, hey, you know what Salesforce is doing for CRM, there's no one out there doing that for identity. There is no kind of shared service identity provider in the cloud that is kind of a modern, innovative version. There was, all kinds of different complex identity systems that you'd have to stand up and run yourself or build yourself. So they decided that, this is something that we can tackle. So they embarked on this about 10 or 11 years ago. And really their goal has been to make kind of a primary cloud. So if you think about the different clouds that exist out in the world, identity certainly is an important one. As part of that, we kind of started out our life as being what we consider a workforce identity provider, meaning that an enterprise would come and be able to utilize Okta as an identity provider to access business apps by their employees, by their contractors, and so on. But what we quickly found out is that there's an equally important need to have identity in the customer-facing, what we call kind of citizen civilian space. So about 4 or 5 years ago, Okta embarked on that journey to provide kind of the same capabilities for accessing commercial applications. And, basically, if you have your CISSP and you log into ISC squared, you log in through Okta. If you're a baseball fan and you do fantasy baseball, you log into MLB.com. You're logging in with Okta. And there's a bunch of these places where you probably see us and don't even know we exist. And then earlier this year, we actually kind of solidified that market by acquiring a company called Auth0. So Auth0 was another organization that saw a need for, consumer-focused, customer-focused identity. And they came at it from a little bit of a different perspective. So they came at it more from a developer perspective, where organizations wanted to be able to kind of custom build, but they wanted to do it in a cloud way, meaning all the plumbing was kind of there, but and the place where they wanted to focus their customization on was more on the end user experience. So if you're an exercise nut, which I definitely am not, but if you have a Peloton or you have Nordic Track or any of these kind of exercise platforms, chances are you're logging in through Auth0. For whatever reason, exercise technology companies love Auth0. I'm not sure why. Probably has something to do with Yohanio, their CEO, being an exercise guy. So that's kind of augmented and brought into Okta, again, shoring up and kind of paying more attention to the customer facing or the customizing citizen facing user experience for authentication. We also had been spending the last several years thinking about, and when I joined Okta about a year ago, obviously this kind of accelerated a little bit. We were thinking about how identity plays a very important role in a zero trust architecture. And some might say, and certainly I say this because of where I live, probably one of the most important roles. Because if you think about what zero trust is, nothing really happens until someone or something requests access to something, right? So that's one of the core tenets of zero trust, is that you're not kind of standing up these relationships in static fashion where you've got all this kind of trust mesh that's out there and it's just kind of statically waiting for someone to access it. It's actually quite the opposite, where you're not building the trust fabric until someone tries to authenticate to something. And in that case, you're actually doing kind of an assessment of whether that request is trustable or not. So Okta has really been focused on that for the last several years. Vinu will talk through and walk through some of the specifics that we kind of do when we kind of build out application architectures and how we kind of apply that trust platform. So again, we kind of thought about this, and this really started back when Google had come up with Beyond Corp, and they were kind of rolling up Beyond Corp internally to build their security hygiene within their organization, and Okta kind of looked at that internally as well and said, okay, we need something that's kind of the front door of trust, right? We call this zero trust, but what it really means is zero trust networking. So you don't necessarily provide trust based upon location or network you're on or anything like that. And specifically, if you look at, kind of the changing dynamic of workforce and where people are when they access things and where the things are that they access. So if you think about users that don't come into an office and applications that don't live in your data center, it's almost an inevitability that we kind of look at a zero trust architecture as being the security stack for that, just because, again, it's really focused on that user, that direct communication to that application, regardless of where the user is, regardless of where the application is. So we started putting pen to paper a few years ago on the concept of kind of these risk policies, and building a risk API around this. And I'll talk about why the risk API is important, not just for us, but for our kind of larger ecosystem of partners. And we looked at this, pretty holistically. So it's not just about the user, it's also about the access device. It's really kind of about the endpoints. And when I say endpoints, I'm thinking about endpoints on both sides of this conversation. So I'm thinking about the endpoints that come in to request access to something, but I'm also thinking about the APIs and the endpoints in the cloud. And really, those are the front doors to the applications, regardless of where those applications live. And then we obviously had spent a lot of time over the last 10 years building in kind of fundamental identity languages that we would support. So all the legacy stuff, LDAP, Active Directory, all the legacy stuff, but also all the modern stuff. So SAML, OIDC, and some of the other kind of internet specific identity languages, and being able to kind of tie into almost any application by leveraging those. And then this concept of the risk engine is tied directly to policy. So you can, and again, as you think about 207 and the fundamentals about kind of the trust algorithms, or the trust engine, the trust policy engine, whatever you want to call it, this is exactly something that is kind of needed to be focused on. So that is, you're looking at the transaction and the user or device comes in and requests access. It's then put through kind of a stack of context. Where is this device coming from? Is the device been updated? Is the user behavior in line with expectations? Are they accessing the same application they always access during the same time of day? Impossible travel kind of things going on. And that context informs the risk engine. And the risk engine then might apply a risk score that says, okay, the trustability of this request is, and I'm arbitrarily making up a number, but let's say if it's a score of 0 to 100, the trustability of this request is a 98, so we let it fly through. And then we can make different policy decisions based on that. So we might say, don't even add any user friction if it's above 90, meaning that, don't even prompt them for a password, don't do any multi-factor. We know based upon other signals that this is a trustable request. Whereas if the trust score is something below that, if it's below 50, again, arbitrary number, then maybe we apply some friction, make them log in, make them do multi-factor, make them do something more arduous than just a password. But we have the flexibility to do that. So the goal of this is, if we think back to my comments about Auth0 focusing on user experience, the goal of this is to make the user experience as clean and as frictionless as possible, while adding the friction if you think that risk exists. And that's where this risk score and this kind of whole integration to the policy engine becomes really important. So I mentioned the ecosystem because, as everyone on this call knows, because there's a lot of us on here, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's no one vendor that's going to give you all of these things. I don't care who you are, how big you are, how much money you got. This is a partnership play. There are a lot of technology companies that exist in this kind of zero trust dance of access to things. And we spend a lot of our time thinking about, how we can provide more value based upon these partnerships. We can take risk signals from other things. We can do device trust. Obviously at Okta, we can do device trust on our own, but we also can rely on some of our partners for device trust. So folks like VMware, AirWatch, MobileIron, all the other technology companies that can give us kind of device state or device risk signals, things that can tell us the trustability of the device, that we can then put that into the mix of the context and then make the decision of access based upon that. Obviously, same thing on kind of the network access side. We integrate with with some of our best friends and technology partners like Zscaler to provide access and capabilities to the application. So if you think about, kind of fluid microsegmentation, providing that layer of security as part of this conversation between a user on a device accessing an application, Zscaler is a really good partner for us to be able to provide that capability and kind of stand up connectivity and tear down connectivity so it doesn't exist in static fashion, only gets kind of stood up at the time of need and then gets pulled back down, which is kind of the best security posture you can hope for. And then we kind of spend a lot of time thinking about, kind of taking this into our policy engine. And Venu will talk about this probably in gory detail about our adaptive authentication and all the different kind of signals and kind of inputs that we can take to change the behavior on the authentication and what that will look like. We also spend a fair amount of our time thinking about trying to get rid of really crappy constructs like passwords. So passwords are terrible. They've always been terrible. They're not getting any better. So we're always thinking about are there ways like FIDO2, WebAuthn, other things that we can apply where there is some device binding, there's some cryptography that's involved, so we can build a better layer of trust, and we can do it in a much better user experience. Because most users these days are pretty familiar with Touch ID and Face ID and biometrics, and they kind of like that. It kind of makes it easy for them to do transactions. And we spend enough time punishing users with terrible password policies, and it's time to kind of think about getting rid of that thing. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how that plays into a zero trust architecture and how that makes a better user experience. Because I think, to me, that's one of the things that's almost always lost in the mix when we talk about security. We talk about security, we talk about access, we talk about all the things we put in front of a user to prevent bad people from coming in. What we don't talk about is how do we turn these things around and make better user experiences. And I think this is an opportunity to do that. So I got the obligatory 800-207 kind of mapping to what we do. We obviously, tend to be, because of we sit in the flow, we sit in between the users and the access to the applications, and we have that kind of adaptive risk-based policy framework. Obviously, as a policy engine, it makes a lot of sense. We can also do enforcement, though, because obviously blocking authentication is one form of enforcement, and we can work with our partners, as I mentioned, Zscaler and others, to do kind of blocking on a more fundamental level of access. Based upon things that we see or things that they see as risky, and we can kind of share that information to determine if we even let that request through, or if we do let it through, what kind of friction do we add to that to make it, make sure that user is kind of proving that they really are who they say they are, and they're on the device that is trusted by the organization, and so on. So we really can sit in a lot of different places in this stack. We also can integrate into existing, what I would consider legacy authentication platforms, so things like CACPIV, Smart Card PKI, which right now is a little long in the tooth, but still exists in the world, and we have to live in that world. So we can integrate into a PKI architecture. You can leverage that for some logins, probably not the most modern of logins, but it's certainly something that can be leveraged as we have an eye towards kind of the more, what I would consider PKI 2.0, which is WebAuthn. We also, as I mentioned earlier, from the ground up, pretty much part of our DNA is built using these kind of modern authentication languages, so the OIDC, OAuth, SAML, those kinds of things. So we tend to speak, just about anything that any application can speak in the world. And as new applications get stood up, they're almost always kind of speaking these languages. But we also, since we've been around for 10 years, have an ability to kind of plug into legacy. So if organizations say, look, my source of truth for users is my ERP system, or this big honking Oracle thing in my data center, we can support that too. We can speak legacy languages, because we realize that these things can't be rolled and updated and innovated overnight, as much as we would love for that to happen. That's not necessarily the way the world works. So, we can support all of the kind of existing legacy stuff, as well as the new modern stuff. One thing I didn't mention that I should, which is there's another kind of frame of partnerships here that's really important, which is integrating into kind of other kind of identity systems. So you got the concept of identity governance, so your SailPoints of the world. Those are also great partners of Okta. So that's a little bit more capability of kind of workflows and orchestration of how a user kind of lives in an environment, comes into the environment, lives in it, then leaves it, that kind of stuff. As well as kind of the privilege access stuff, which is near and dear to our heart now that solar winds and other things have happened. That's what's one of the areas where most organizations are looking to kind of shore up their identity and access management, which is, the most important folks accessing the most important things probably need to be treated a little differently. Again, always thinking about what the end user experience is going to be and making it as pleasant as possible, but also thinking about that as a use case and making sure those things are protected in a secure and strong fashion. And that's all I had to say. I'm gonna shut up now and turn it over to Venu, and he's gonna walk through some pretty cool stuff.
Hey, morning everyone. Let me share my screen real quick. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Hey, thanks, Sean. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the platform a little bit, right? I mean, do a demo in the sense I'll show two experiences, one from an end user perspective and the other from an admin perspective, where I walk in, I walk through, like the application integration scenarios, and then more focus on our policy framework. How do we apply policies with from an authentication perspective, right? So, to start with, what you see here is a portal, right? So as Sean mentioned, we are a multi-tenant cloud service. So anybody or any customer who gets Okta, who buys Okta, will have a portal, to access, right? And the portal is the same for both end user and the admin. The only thing is that from an end user perspective, they won't see anything, admin related functionalities and things like that, right? So I'm going to log in here as Justin Williams. He's an end user. He's trying to access the application. So you can notice, at least in the login, this is our login widget. You can see that, he has an option. As Sean talked about this, being in the federal space, we have to, most of our customers ask, integration with PIV and CAT. So we support PIV and CAT. So Justin, if he wants, he can use PIV and CAT, but then, for now, I don't have, PIV. So I'm going to use, so let me go here. Now, you can see, Justin has an option here, right? So I have a YubiKey in my machine, that's actually in my USB YubiKey. I can use a YubiKey, or I can use the WebAuth and like the Touch ID on my Mac, or I can use a Google Authenticator. I can use an Okta Verify, which is our own multi-factor authentication, app. That's a soft token that you can download on your smartphone, that can generate a one-time code, or it can send a push notification. So I'm just going to use this for now. And, again, here, this is a configurable piece, right? I mean, Justin can say, and we left it up to the end user too, right? I mean, Justin can say, hey, I don't want to press this button every time. Every time when I select Okta Verify, just send the push automatically, right? And also from an organization perspective, they can also say, hey, for this set of users, only allow to log in them with their YubiKey, or, allow from Okta Verify, right? So, the point is we support several multi-factor authentication tokens, and, the organization or the agency implementing this as a choice when it comes to choose, which authentication factor goes with which set of users or which set of applications. Okay, so let me just do this send push. I should probably see a push notification in my phone. So let me show that. Okay, so I just got a push notification on my phone. I'm just going to say yes, it's me. And now I don't need this. So as an end user, Justin just logged in, right? I mean, so you can think this is our end user portal, and basically this is like a single point of entry. We call this Okta dashboard, for users to access, any application they have access to, right? And we use this Okta, we use this internally too. So every day, I log in, first thing I do is I log into my dashboard, and then from there I go to different applications, depending on what I need. But from an end user perspective, this is pretty much it, right? I mean, they can go and access. And then you saw that, when I logged into the portal, I had to go through an MFA prompt and things like that. From a implementation perspective, you can implement like, the users can directly go to the application and then it'll be redirected to, it's all SAML-based integration most of the time. So, SP initiated and IDP initiated, both of the flows we support, right? We support other protocols too. I'll talk about it, when I go to the admin section. But then, what I want to make another point is, we can have app-specific, multi-factor policies too, right? So if Justin, wants to access AWS, he again has to go through, and again, an MFA prompt, right? So the point is, we can have login at a global level, MFA at the global level, and we can also have app-specific policies when it comes to multi-factor authentication, depending on the sensitivity of the app and things like that, right? So that's pretty much it from an end user perspective. Now, let me go into the admin side a little bit, right? This is where, we can talk about. So from an admin perspective, what they really see, again, the first thing, from a dashboard perspective, they're going to see a snapshot of the tenant itself. Like, it could be, how many users are there in your, org or in your tenant, how many applications are integrated, some, tasks that happen, right? I mean, so here I see one user got logged out, and then if there's any change that been made from a admin perspective, that also is listed here, right? The other, aspect to our service, is what we call like health insights and threat insights, right? Health insight is basically Okta being a SaaS solution, we do security audits, right, for the tenant, right? For all the customers, we do a level of auditing from a security perspective, just to make sure that, security best practices are followed, right? From a tenant perspective, it's always like a shared responsibility, SaaS service. So Okta has responsibility to secure the, our service and things like that. But from a tenant perspective, they have to make sure they, configure things, securely, right? For example, if multi-factor authentication is not enabled for administrators, right? So we can just point out saying that, hey, you have 5 administrators that they don't have multi-factor, right? So that's our health insight. And then we have another service, which is threat insights. Again, this is not, that's part of our service where we can look at, some heuristics and say, block some malicious IPs, right? So if we see some, it could be like, somebody trying to access our service from an IP, giving like, the same username but different passwords, or it's the same passwords but different usernames. They're trying to constantly authenticate against our service. We can block that IP and tag it as malicious, which means that any authentication attempt from that IP will be denied, right? And this is a service because we have almost 13,000 customers in our service now. We get a lot of authentications from different parts of the world and things like that. So right, so we can analyze, we do some analytics and heuristics and figure out which could be a malicious activity happening, right? So that's again part of our service. But then when you go a little bit deeper into actual admin things, there are 3 main things that needs to happen in Okta, right? One is we need to get some users into our solution, right? So that's where our integrations with directories. I mean, most commonly we see when we go into any organization or agency, it's about, hey, can you integrate with Active Directory? Can you integrate with our LDAP solution, right? So we have, we can integrate with the on-prem Active Directory or any LDAP, and we can pull in the users in, right? In my tenant, I have, and we can integrate with multiple Active Directory, and we can pull in all the users into our solution, right? And then this is a lightweight integration where you actually install an agent on a server that's joined to the domain. That'll enable you to pull and push users or user attributes here and there. Okay, so that's one way to get the users in. We also can integrate, with an authoritative source. Again, there are customers that use us in a way that we need to pull user information from an authoritative source. Could be an HR system or could be some system they use to get the user, right? So that's one way to get the users in, right? Either through integration with an on-prem LDAP or integration with an authoritative source, right? And now once the users are in, then comes hey, what applications does these users need to access, right? So this is where like Sean talked about the way we have built a lot of integrations and several integrations with, different kind of applications, right? So we have pre-built, this is what we call our Okta integration network. We have pre-built integrations with most of the common, SaaS applications you see out there. So here you can see that, right? So these are all like pre-built integrations. You just select which you want, which application you want, and then you basically enter some, information with regards to that application, and then boom, you're integrate with that application, right? So one of the things we try to, Sean talked about from a user experience perspective, where we do, try to, reduce the friction when it comes to user logins and all, give us, good user experience, right? I mean, we have tried the same also from an admin perspective, right? So that's why we have all this pre-built integrations, right? Salesforce, or most of the common, and then you can see that, what protocols we support, or what, these integrations, right? I mean, SAML, we do single sign-on, we can do provisioning to those applications. Those are also listed here. But if you scroll down here, right, so we have specific integrations. Again, it's all categorized, but then we have, most of the players we see in the zero trust space, be it like device, management solutions, or endpoint solutions, or solutions like Zscaler or Palo. We have, CrowdStrike, we have integrations, and these integrations could be, different ways, right? One, to get signals from, those solutions, and the other also enabling admins to log in, seamlessly to their interfaces and things like that, right? So that's on the application side. And again, from an application perspective, we are big proponents of open standards, right? So we support the SAML, SAML protocol, OIDC, OAuth, all these newer modern protocols we support. And as far as possible, as much as possible, we also, recommend the customers to have their applications like modern enabled. But then we also recognize, right? So there are a lot of, agencies, or, even big organizations, they have, they're in a hybrid mode. They probably have a lot of legacy applications that probably doesn't support modern protocols for SSO and things like that, right? So we have a component that we can install on-prem, that can act as a reverse proxy, and then we can integrate with applications that doesn't support SAML or OpenID Connect or all these newer protocols, right? So from a from an agent or customer perspective, most of them uses us in both, like whether for authentication to on-prem applications or authentication to SaaS applications, right? So we can be, we can integrate with both. So that's what I was trying to say. And now, once those applications are integrated, now, you actually, create some policies to tie these two together, right? So there are a few things involved in when you create a policy. One is you need to determine, from an MFA perspective, what factors are, you allow in your environment, right? So whatever you see here is basically the ones which we support, right? So Okta Verify, this is what I showed, when I tried to log in initially. It's a soft token, it's Okta's app, that can support push notifications and things like that. But then you can see here, right, we support FIDO2 standard, WebAuthn based MFA, YubiKey, and some, on-prem, legacy technologies too, right? So we also support, time-based tokens, any TOTP-based tokens we can support. And, so you enable these factors, and then you set some policies, which determine here, right? Hey, when the user tries to log in to Okta or any application, let them, take them through an enrollment process, right? That's what this factor enrollment policy depends, right? And then this can be assigned. So if I go here, it says, hey, this is an MFA enrollment policy that gets assigned to a group, a group of people who are in the sales group. And then, these are the factors, that the group can, enroll for Okta Verify Google Authenticator, right? So that's the enrollment policy, right? And now from an authentication policy, right? So this is what sign on, right? So I have a bunch of policies here. I can, take a few of them, and then, so this is, if I go here, And this is, I'm just saying, enable MFA. Whoever is in the sales group and they try to log in, they have to go through an MFA, right? So I'm just going to say, so this is where we can look at, the behavior, right? So one thing is that if it's a new city, so you can see that if a new city, new country, or a new device or new location, right? So these are all the behavior aspects we can look at, right? So when it's new city, think about somebody is trying to, somebody is trying to log in to an application from, Maryland, every time, right? I mean, so we can look at for the past, X number of authentications. It happened, the location was in, Rockville, Maryland, but then the next, login attempt is coming from New York City, right? So it may be the same user, but, we are seeing it's coming from a different city. So, we assess a small amount of risk, but then, we can also say, have policies saying that if it's a new city, then, give, ask the user for a password, and also, ask them for a factor, right? Whichever is, configured for that user, right? So, and then, we can also look at, anonymous browsers, right? So I'm having a policy here, say, if we determine it's coming from an anonymous browser, deny the access, right? And then, we also have, for example, if it's a high risky authentication attempt, we can also do something like a factor sequence, which is like, ask the user to provide, this is kind of a passwordless experience. Instead of asking the password, ask them probably, their the UB key, and also we can add another one. I can also say, ask for, Okta Verify or Google Authenticator, right? So it'll go through a sequence of, asking for different MFA factors, right? Then, we can also look at, if I go here, networks, you can also designate like trusted zone, trusted zone, from an authentication attempt perspective. We have, geolocation capabilities that we can look at, I have some specific, policies here or zones, which I set up saying that, hey, I'm not allowing, there's no, none of my users are going to be existing in these countries. So I want to deny all the authentication attempts from those countries and things like that. And, again, Tor browser, anonymous, or, anything from that zone, I'm going to completely deny, right? And then we also have this, behavior detection. I explained this, right? So if it's a new city, new country, and then this is what, the velocity rule, right? So this is, if I say example, I'm trying to log in from, Maryland, Rockville, Maryland, probably around 9 a.m. in the morning to an application. And then the next login, we see it coming from San Francisco, California, right, at 10 a.m., right? So physically, it's impossible to be in the same location at these two locations in an hour, right? So we can, we can look at that and then say completely deny that authentication attempt, right? Then, from a device perspective, again, Sean talked about this a little bit. These are things which can, we can, include in our policies, right? So we can enable device trust from an, like Android or iOS perspective, right? And we can also work with solutions like Workspace ONE. In fact, there are a few customers I'm actually working with now where they specifically want to look at, enable mobile access for a few applications, and they want to look at, signals we get from Workspace ONE, right? So we have specific integrations with Workspace ONE, which says, Workspace ONE can give us information around, hey, if this, what is it, if the device is trusted or not, right? So if the device is, and we can use that in our policies. Once we enable that, we can use that in our application specific policies saying that, hey, if the device is not trusted, deny the access, or if it's, trusted, allow access, maybe with a multi-factor authentication. So that's from a, that's from a policy perspective, right? I touched upon what are the factors available, how do you get, different risk and signals into our policies, and then, lastly, what I want to show or talk about is everything, again, this is important again, also from a zero trust perspective, right? So I think, Sean talked about in the slide, where we have specific integrations with SIM solutions and things like that, right? So most of our customers try to get this, we completely log everything. This is a login attempt for, my specific sample user I try to log in, right? So if I do here, it'll specifically say, where I try to log in from, which machine, and then, the operating systems and things like that. And you can, all these information can be fed into a SIM solution like Splunk or ArcSight, and then they can do the analytics at that point, right? We are also coming out with a log streaming capability, meaning we can just enable that log streaming, and then as and when these events can be fed to the SIM solutions like Event Bridge in AWS and Splunk, these are all real time. We can feed information to that. So that's also coming, it's in beta and it'll be there soon in our solution. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I think unless we have any questions or any specific capabilities or things you want to talk about.
So you guys didn't use up the full 75. So if there are any quick questions, we could answer those now if anybody has any. Otherwise, we'll just go right into F5.
Yep, if there are no questions now, like I said earlier, everyone knows how to get in touch with us, so feel free to reach out.
Sounds good. And we'll stay till the end too, if anybody wants to wait and ask later. Okay, well, awesome. Thank you so much, Vanu and Sean and the Okta team for putting this together. Will our F5 networks folks who'll be presenting please begin sharing their screen? And I'm gonna stop record real quick.